The fog off Mobile Bay rolled in thick as wool, swallowing the courthouse steps until the gas lamps looked like dying stars. Somewhere in that gray, a bell tolled once, slow and final, and the sound traveled through the crowd the way a verdict travels through a man's bones. Victoria Thornhill stood behind a row of men with rifles, her gloved hands clenched so tightly her nails cut into her palms. She could taste iron on her tongue, though she had not bitten herself. The taste came from fear, from memory, from the old bruises that still lived under her skin like hidden ink. They had Joshua on his knees in the mud. His shirt had been torn open down the back. Blood seeped from a fresh cut at his shoulder and ran in thin lines along scars that were older than this night. Someone had put a chain around his neck, not because it was necessary, but because they wanted the message to be unmistakable. Property. A preacher murmured scripture that sounded like permission. A man in a fine coat read the charges as if reciting shipping inventory. Insolence, assault, conspiracy. And beneath the official words, the real accusation hung in the air where everyone could smell it. He protected her. Joshua lifted his head and found Victoria through the fog. His eyes were steady, almost gentle, and that gentleness cracked her worse than any blow Robert Thornhill had ever landed. "I told you not to come," he said, voice low enough that only she heard it. Victoria shook her head, trembling. "I can't leave you." A rifle cocked. Somebody shouted for silence. Victoria stepped forward before she understood she was moving. The crowd surged, angry, hungry for spectacle. A hand grabbed her arm. She ripped free, the knife she kept hidden against her thigh, suddenly heavy with purpose. "If you do this," she cried, voice breaking across the fog, "then you will have to kill me too." Joshua's eyes widened, just a fraction. And in that fraction of a moment, Victoria realized the truth that would ruin her forever. The man she feared most in the world was not on his knees in the mud. He was the one who had once called himself her husband. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story. Mobile, in the autumn of 1835, wore its beauty like a warning. The port city breathed damp air from the Gulf, heavy with salt and rot, and when the fog crept inland, it did not drift so much as claim. It slid through streets and courtyards, wrapped itself around iron gates, and pressed against windows as if listening. Ships groaned at the docks. Chains clinked. Somewhere, always, there was the sound of men shouting orders and other men answering without names. Thornhill stood just beyond the city's polite edges, where refinement thinned and law softened into habit. The house was large, built to impress, but it sat too far from neighbors to feel safe. Live oaks crowded close, their branches sagging under moss that moved like old, tired ghosts when the wind passed through. At night, the place felt watched. Victoria Ann Thornhill had learned to fear silence there. At 21, she looked younger than her years, not because of softness, but because fear had hollowed her. Her husband, Robert Thornhill, had been a respected man in Mobile society, generous in public, cruel in private. He had taught her early that beauty was not protection and obedience was never enough. The scars he left were mostly hidden, thin lines along her back, a pale mark at her wrist where fingers had closed too tightly. Others were invisible but louder. The way she startled at footsteps, the way male voices made her chest tighten, the way night felt like a threat rather than rest. When Robert died in a riding accident that some whispered was no accident at all, society expressed sympathy. Victoria felt only relief sharpened by guilt. Freedom came too late to feel clean. It arrived tangled with nightmares. She inherited everything and trusted nothing. Victoria locked doors obsessively. She slept with a knife beneath her pillow, fingers wrapped around the hilt until her hand cramped. She avoided mirrors because sometimes she expected to see Robert behind her. She did not attend gatherings. She did not ride into the city. She lived inside the narrow perimeter of survival. The enslaved people on her property existed to her as distant shapes. Not because she despised them, but because closeness felt dangerous. She had learned that anyone could hurt you. Better not to let anyone close enough to try. Joshua lived on the far edge of that distance. He had arrived at Thornhill a year earlier, purchased as part of a debt settlement, his value calculated by muscle and silence. He was 26 and already carried a lifetime of loss in his bones. On another plantation, he had once been a husband, a father. He had held his daughter when she was small enough to curl against his chest, her breath warm and trusting. Then the owner's debts came due. Joshua watched his wife and child sold away in the same afternoon, his voice locked in his throat while his world split apart. After that day, something in him went still, not rage. Rage required hope. What remained was endurance. He spoke little. He kept his eyes guarded. He did not laugh. Other enslaved people avoided him, mistaking his silence for menace. Overseers left him to the heaviest labor because he never complained and never broke. Joshua worked with horses, with iron, with broken things. He fixed what others gave up on. He slept lightly. He trusted no one. And yet, despite the way his face closed itself to the world, there was a discipline to his gentleness. He moved carefully around women. He stepped back rather than forward. When voices rose, he lowered his own. Joshua had learned early what violence sounded like before it arrived. Before the night of the attack, he had never seen Victoria up close. He had glimpsed her once or twice from a distance. A pale figure at an upstairs window, a shape moving quickly through the corridor with eyes cast down. He knew her name only because others whispered it. The frightened widow. The broken one. The mad one, some said. He did not think of her much. Survival left little room for curiosity. The night the bandits came shattered that separation. They came after midnight, emboldened by fog and rumor. Isolated house. Young widow. No husband. Easy pickings. They broke glass and laughed too loudly, drunk on the certainty that no one would stop them. Joshua woke to the sound of a scream that cut through him like a blade. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the sound of someone who had already learned that shouting often made things worse. Joshua did not think. He moved. When he burst into Victoria's room and fought like a man possessed, it was not heroism that drove him. It was memory. The memory of standing helpless while his family was taken. The certainty that if he hesitated now, he would live with that helplessness forever. When it was over, when the intruders fled bleeding into the fog, Joshua stood shaking, blood running down his arm, heart pounding like it wanted out of his chest. And Victoria saw him. Not as a shadow, not as a threat, as a man who had stepped between her and the worst thing she could imagine. For Joshua, that moment was dangerous in a way the fight had not been, because he saw something change in her eyes. Not gratitude alone. Recognition. After that night, fear no longer belonged to only one of them. Victoria began to notice the world again, painfully, cautiously. She noticed how Joshua positioned himself near doorways without blocking them, how he never entered her space unless invited, how he watched the dark for her when she could not. Joshua noticed how Victoria flinched at raised voices, how she held herself like someone bracing for impact even when nothing threatened, how she listened to him, truly listened, in a way no white person ever had. Neither of them named what was happening. They called it necessity, protection, practicality. But something fragile and forbidden had already taken root, born not from desire, but from fear shared and survived. And the house at Thornhill, long steeped in violence, began to hold a different kind of tension. The attack did not end when the bandits fled. That was the lie everyone wanted to believe. That violence was a single night, a sudden storm that passed if you survived it. But Thornhill did not return to normal. It tightened. The air inside the house grew alert, as if walls and corridors themselves had learned to listen. Victoria stopped sleeping. Every creak of wood sounded like a footstep. Every breath of wind against the shutters felt like a hand testing the latch. She lay rigid in her bed, knife clenched in her fist, eyes fixed on the door until dawn thinned the darkness into something survivable. Joshua knew before she said a word. On the second night after the attack, he found her sitting on the floor beside the bed, back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. The candle on the table had burned almost to nothing. He did not speak at first. He knocked once, softly, the way he had learned to knock so as not to startle horses. When she did not answer, he waited. Then, gently, "Mrs. Thornhill?" Victoria looked up, eyes glassy with exhaustion. For a moment, she seemed confused by his presence, as if she had not yet separated him from the men who had tried to break into her life. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to call you." "You didn't," Joshua replied. "I heard you moving." She tried to stand and failed, her legs trembling beneath her. Without thinking, Joshua stepped forward, then stopped himself halfway, hands lifting slightly, palms open. "May I?" he asked quietly. The question surprised her more than the gesture. "Yes," she said after a moment. Joshua offered his arm, not his hands. She took it, gripping the fabric of his sleeve as if it were a lifeline. He steadied her, careful not to pull, careful not to rush. "I can't sleep," she said, shame edging her voice. "I know they're gone, but my body doesn't believe it." Joshua nodded once. "It takes time." "For you too?" she asked, almost involuntarily. The question hovered, intimate and dangerous. "Yes," he answered simply. She hesitated, then gestured weakly toward the chair near the door. "Would you sit, just until the morning?" Joshua understood the risk immediately. Being alone with her in her bedchamber, even in plain sight, even clothed and careful, was a transgression the law did not forgive. But he also understood the sound of fear that did not fade with daylight. "I'll sit by the door," he said. "I won't come closer." "That's fine," Victoria replied quickly. "That's perfect." He took the chair and positioned himself where he could see both the door and the window. He sat upright, alert, as if guarding a perimeter only he could see. Minutes passed, then more. The candle burned low. Victoria lay back against the bed, still clutching the knife, but her breathing slowly eased. "Joshua?" she said after a long silence. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't have to call me that," she said. "Not when we're alone." Another pause. "What should I call you?" "My name," she replied. "Victoria." He nodded. "Victoria." Hearing it spoken without fear or command sent a shiver through her. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. "You weren't afraid that night," she said, "when you came into my room." Joshua's gaze stayed on the door. "I was afraid." "You didn't look like it." "I was afraid of being too late," he said. The words settled between them, heavy with meanings neither of them fully unpacked. The nights that followed set a pattern neither dared name. Joshua sat watch, while Victoria slept in fractured pieces. Some nights she spoke in her dreams, breath hitching, fingers tightening around the sheets. Joshua never moved closer, never touched her, unless she reached out first, and when she did, it was always accidental, a hand brushing his sleeve as she shifted, a knuckle catching briefly against his wrist. Each time both of them stilled. The boundary held. Barely. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in from the bay, sudden and violent. The house shuddered as rain lashed the windows. Victoria woke with a cry, sitting bolt upright, breath tearing from her chest. Joshua was at her side in 2 strides, then stopped, caught himself, knelt instead of standing over her. "You're safe," he said softly. "I'm here." She nodded, tears spilling freely now, humiliation forgotten. "I know, my body remembers things I don't want it to." "So does mine," Joshua said before he could stop himself. The confession startled them both. Victoria looked at him, really looked, in the low, flickering light. She saw the scars on his arms, the tension in his jaw, the careful way he held himself back as if restraint were a daily discipline. "You don't frighten me," she said quietly. "You're the only man who doesn't." Joshua's chest tightened painfully. "That's dangerous," he replied. "Yes," she agreed, "but it's also true." In that moment, something shifted, not into love, not yet, but into reliance. Trust forged not by desire, but by shared survival. And, in a world built to punish such closeness, that reliance was the most dangerous thing of all. What began as vigilance became ritual. Joshua's chair by the door remained even on nights when Victoria insisted she would be fine alone. He stayed anyway, silent and steady. A presence that asked nothing of her except honesty. In return, she gave him something she had not given any man since childhood. Permission to exist near her without fear. The house learned this new rhythm. Footsteps slowed in the corridors. Candles were placed deliberately. Doors were checked once, not twice. Victoria began to sleep in longer stretches, her dreams still troubled, but no longer endless. When she woke shaking, Joshua was there, not looming, not commanding, simply there, breathing, human. Days followed nights, and with daylight came a cautious widening of their world. Victoria asked Joshua to walk with her in the garden after breakfast. Not close, not arm in arm, a few paces apart, as propriety demanded. Yet even that small request sent whispers through the household. A mistress did not walk with an enslaved man unless there was a reason. "There is a reason," Victoria told herself. "I need air. I need safety." Both were true. They walked among the oaks where Spanish moss brushed Joshua's shoulders and dappled Victoria's dress with shadow. The air smelled of damp leaves and iron-rich earth. Cicadas rattled like distant warnings. "You don't have to do this," Joshua said quietly as they walked. "People will talk." "They already do," Victoria replied. "I can't live my life shaped by their mouths." Joshua nodded. He understood mouths that devoured truth. She asked him about his work, about the horses, about the repairs he made at the forge. He answered carefully at first, then with more ease when he realized she was listening, not extracting. In turn, she spoke, haltingly at first, about Robert. She did not tell the story all at once. Trauma seldom allowed for neat chronology. She told it in fragments. A belt buckle flashing in lamplight, a door locked from the outside, the way apologies had been demanded as proof of obedience. Joshua did not interrupt. He did not offer solutions. He did not say what she should have done. He listened with the kind of attention that steadied her breathing simply by existing. When she finished one such fragment, she asked, "Does it make me weak?" Joshua stopped walking. He turned to her, keeping his distance, his voice level. "No," he said. "It means you survived." The word lodged in her chest and refused to leave. They began to share silence without discomfort, on the veranda at dusk, in the library while dust motes drifted through sunbeams. Silence became something they held together rather than endured alone. Joshua noticed things he tried not to notice, the way Victoria flinched less when he stood nearby, the way she began to meet his gaze, briefly at first, then longer, the way her laughter, rare and surprised, sounded like something newly discovered rather than remembered. Victoria noticed things too. How Joshua positioned himself between her and doorways without blocking her path. How he announced himself before entering a room. How his voice softened when he sensed her tension rising, not because she asked, but because he watched. They did not touch. That was Joshua's rule. "Not yet," he said one evening when Victoria, startled by thunder, reached instinctively for his hand and froze, horrified by her own impulse. "It's all right," she whispered, pulling back. "I'm sorry." Joshua shook his head gently. "You don't need to apologize. But if we cross that line before you're ready, it will take something from you. I won't do that. His restraint frightened her more than desire would have, because it was kind. The forbidden bond deepened through knowledge. Victoria asked Joshua to teach her how to recognize sounds at night. The difference between wind and footsteps, between a settling beam and a forced door. Joshua taught her patiently, turning fear into information, information into control. In return, she taught him letters. It happened by accident. She had been reading in the library when Joshua paused at the door, hesitant. "You can come in," she said. He lingered, eyes drawn to the page in her hands. "You read every night," he said. "It helps you sleep." "Yes," she replied. "It keeps the thoughts from circling." He hesitated, then said, "My wife used to ask me to tell her stories. I couldn't read them, but I remembered enough to make something new." Victoria closed the book slowly. "Would you like to learn?" The question was reckless, illegal, dangerous. Joshua met her eyes. "Yes," he said, "but only if it doesn't put you at risk." She smiled, small and fierce. "We will be careful." They began with the alphabet, whispered at the table while the house slept. Victoria traced letters with her finger. Joshua followed, his hands large and precise, his concentration absolute. When he read his first full sentence aloud, halting but proud, Victoria clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying. "No one has ever taught me anything," he said quietly. "No one should have been denied," she replied. Fear returned in waves. Some nights, Victoria recoiled suddenly, memories rising unbidden. Joshua learned to step back instantly, to ground her with words instead of touch. "You're here," he would say. "It's night. The door is locked. I'm watching." Other nights, fear came to Joshua. He would sit rigid, jaw tight, eyes distant, memories of his wife and child pressing hard against his chest. Victoria learned not to ask questions that reopened wounds without warning. Instead, she offered presence. "I'm here," she would say. "You don't have to speak." The bond between them became a quiet conspiracy against despair. They spoke of God. "I don't know if I believe He protected me," Victoria said one night, voice low, "or if I simply endured." "My mother said God does not always stop the storm," Joshua replied. "Sometimes He teaches us how to stand in it." Victoria absorbed that, the idea settling into her bones. They spoke of freedom, carefully. "I don't know what it would look like," Joshua said. "I only know what it isn't." "I know what captivity looks like," Victoria answered softly, "even when the bars are velvet." The first time they almost kissed, it was because of a laugh. It startled them both. Victoria's laugh, sudden and bright, at a story Joshua told about a stubborn horse that refused every command except kindness. The sound hung between them, alive, unguarded. Joshua smiled without thinking. Victoria's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. Joshua stepped back first. "We should stop," he said, voice strained. Victoria nodded, heart racing. "Yes." They did not stop seeing each other. Instead, they learned the cost of restraint. Each shared glance became heavier. Each near touch sharpened awareness. Desire did not erupt. It accumulated, layered with fear, reverence, and choice. Joshua struggled most with guilt. "I am enslaved," he said one night, anger breaking through his calm. "This world will say you took advantage of me, or that I corrupted you. Either way you lose. I become a crime." Victoria stepped closer than she ever had, stopping just short of contact. "I won't pretend you don't exist to protect myself," she said. "I won't survive by erasing you." The words steadied him and terrified him. The house noticed. Servants whispered. The overseer watched. Neighbors asked questions framed as concern. And somewhere beyond Thornhill's gates, a man named Marcus Thornhill began his journey south, carrying papers and entitlement like weapons. Love had not yet been spoken aloud, but it had been built, carefully, painfully, out of shared fear, shared silence, and the radical act of seeing one another as fully human. And that was more dangerous than any kiss. The first sign was the horses. They arrived before Marcus Thornhill did, 4 fine animals, hard-muscled and impatient, bearing the dust of the road from New Orleans. Their presence unsettled the estate like a bad omen. Joshua noticed it immediately. Horses sensed intent. They carried it in their nerves and sweat. These animals had been ridden hard by a man who believed he was coming to claim something owed. Marcus arrived the next morning. He came with papers, with smiles that never reached his eyes, with the unmistakable confidence of a man who had never been denied. He looked like Robert, same sharp nose, same heavy hands, but where Robert had been volatile, Marcus was cold, calculating. He took in Thornhill with a single, appraising glance, already measuring what could be seized and what must be broken. Victoria received him in the parlor, spine straight, hands folded, heart hammering against old scars. Marcus kissed her cheek without asking. "My poor sister-in-law," he said softly. "Alone all this time." "I have not been alone," Victoria replied before she could stop herself. Marcus's eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the doorway, toward Joshua's absence, toward the places where a protector might stand. "So I hear," Marcus said lightly. "Rumors travel faster than river fog." From that moment, the air changed. Marcus took over dinners, conversations, decisions. He spoke of Robert's wishes as if they were commandments, of law as if it were a cudgel. He produced documents that suggested, not proved, that Victoria's inheritance was conditional, that her continued control of Thornhill required a marriage within the family. "You are frightened," Marcus told her one evening, his voice low and precise. "A frightened woman makes poor decisions. Allow me to make them for you." Victoria's breath came shallow. "I will not marry you." Marcus smiled. "You will." Joshua learned of Marcus not through words, but through the tightening of space. He was reassigned away from the house, watched more closely, questioned about his whereabouts. The overseer's tone sharpened. Casual cruelty crept into routine orders. Joshua understood the message. That night, Victoria found him in the forge, hands braced on the anvil, knuckles white. "He's going to force me," she whispered. "He says the law is on his side." Joshua closed his eyes, fighting the surge of helpless rage. "The law often is." "They'll hurt you," she said. "If he suspects—" "He already does," Joshua replied. "Men like him don't need proof." Marcus made his move 3 days later. He summoned Joshua to the house under the pretense of repairs, then kept him waiting in the hall while he spoke loudly enough for every servant to hear. "An enslaved man has no business in the mistress's rooms," Marcus said. "It invites confusion." Joshua said nothing. "That silence," Marcus continued, turning at last, "can be mistaken for defiance." Joshua met his gaze briefly, then lowered his eyes. The discipline cost him. He felt it in his teeth, in the old scars along his back. Later that night, Marcus confronted Victoria. "I know what you've done," he said, closing the door behind him. "I know who you let near you. If this reaches Mobile society, you will be ruined, and he will be dead." Victoria's knees nearly gave way. "You don't get to threaten me," she said, forcing the words out. Marcus leaned closer, breath cold. "I don't threaten. I promise." The crisis sharpened quickly. Joshua was accused of theft, then of insolence, then of violence he had not committed. Each accusation carried a consequence. Confinement, lashes threatened, sale whispered. Victoria begged the lawyer, pleaded with the magistrate. Each door closed with polite regret. One night, she heard shouting from the yard. She ran. Joshua was on his knees, hands bound, the overseer's whip poised, not yet striking, waiting for permission. "Stop!" Victoria cried. Marcus turned, pleased. "There you are." "If you touch him," Victoria said, voice shaking but loud, "I will expose you, your lies, your coercion, your brother's crimes." Marcus laughed. "You think anyone will listen?" Joshua lifted his head, blood at his lip, eyes steady on Victoria. The look he gave her was not fear. It was resolve. That look broke her. In that instant, Victoria understood what survival would cost if she stayed. She understood that fear had kept her alive once. But it would kill Joshua now. That night, she made her choice. She sold what she could, quietly. She wrote manumission papers for every enslaved person on Thornhill and placed them with a lawyer who owed her a favor and feared exposure. She packed only what could be carried. She went to Joshua's door before dawn. "We leave," she said. "Now." Joshua stared at her, then nodded. "I will protect you." "No," Victoria replied, taking his hands, not flinching. "We protect each other." Behind them, Thornhill slept, heavy with secrets, ripe for violence. Ahead lay pursuit, law, and a world that would call their love a crime. And the noose, invisible but tightening, had begun to pull. They did not leave quietly. The moment Joshua and Victoria slipped beyond the oak-lined drive, Thornhill seemed to wake behind them, as if the house itself sensed betrayal. Dogs barked in the distance. A lantern flared to life near the stables. Somewhere, a man shouted Marcus's name. Joshua took Victoria's hand and pulled her into the fog. They ran through the low ground first, boots sinking into damp earth, breath tearing from their chests. The bay air tasted sharp, metallic. Victoria's skirts caught on roots and brush. Joshua lifted her without stopping, carrying her across a narrow creek while water soaked his trousers and numbed his legs. Behind them, a gunshot cracked the night. "They've seen us," Victoria gasped. Joshua did not answer. He ran. They reached the skiff hidden among the reeds just as lantern light cut through the fog. Joshua shoved Victoria into the boat and cut the rope with a single, practiced motion. Oars hit water. The current seized them hard, spinning the skiff sideways. Another shot. Wood splintered inches from Joshua's shoulder. "Down," he said, forcing Victoria flat as he dug the oars in with brutal strength. His injured arm screamed in protest, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar. Fear was not. The river carried them fast, away from Thornhill, away from the law that had already decided their guilt. By dawn, they were miles south, hidden beneath overhanging brush. Victoria shook uncontrollably, shock finally catching her. "You're bleeding," she whispered, pressing her hands against Joshua's arm. "I've had worse," he said, though his vision swam. They did not rest long. Marcus Thornhill was not a man who accepted loss. By noon, posters were being nailed in Mobile, a reward for the return of an escaped slave, dead or alive. No mention of Victoria. She was assumed to be a victim, or property to be reclaimed later. Hunters took the trail by afternoon. Joshua heard them before he saw them. The distant baying of dogs, the rhythm of men who believed the world would part for them. He altered their course, dragging the skiff through marsh grass, masking scent with stagnant water, forcing Victoria to wade through muck that sucked at her boots and threatened to pull her under. At one point, a dog broke through the fog, teeth bared, eyes wild. Joshua stepped between it and Victoria without hesitation. The animal lunged. Joshua caught it midair, rolling into the mud as jaws snapped inches from his throat. He drove his forearm into its neck, holding until the body went slack beneath him. Victoria watched, frozen, horror and awe tangled tight. Joshua rose slowly, shaking, face streaked with mud and blood. "We can't stop," he said hoarsely. They moved until nightfall collapsed around them again. It was in an abandoned shrimping shack, half-rotted and listing toward the bay, that Marcus finally caught them. He came alone. Joshua sensed him before he saw him, the way prey senses the hunter who enjoys the kill too much. Joshua pushed Victoria behind him as Marcus stepped into the doorway, pistol raised, smile thin and triumphant. "You could have lived comfortably," Marcus said. "All you had to do was obey." Victoria's voice shook but did not break. "I would rather die." Marcus laughed. "That can be arranged." He raised the pistol. Joshua moved. He lunged forward just as the shot fired, the sound deafening in the small space. Pain exploded through Joshua's side, white-hot and blinding. He slammed into Marcus, driving him back against the wall. The pistol clattered to the floor. They struggled, bodies crashing into rotting boards. Marcus fought dirty, clawing at Joshua's wound, fingers slick with blood. Joshua roared, not in rage but in refusal, and drove his fist into Marcus's jaw. Victoria scrambled for the pistol. Her hands shook violently as she picked it up, the weight terrifying. Marcus saw her and laughed even as blood ran from his mouth. "You won't," he taunted. "You're too afraid." Victoria raised the gun. In that moment, she saw Robert, the closed doors, the locked nights, the years stolen by fear. She pulled the trigger. The shot tore through the shack and into the bay beyond. Marcus staggered, shock flashing across his face as the bullet struck his shoulder. He fell hard, screaming, clutching the wound. Joshua collapsed to one knee, strength draining fast. Victoria stood over Marcus, the gun still raised, her entire body shaking. "If you follow us," she said, voice raw and steady, "I will finish this, and I will tell everyone what you did to your brother's wife. Every mark, every night." Marcus stared up at her, hatred and fear warring in his eyes. He knew then, truly knew, that she was no longer breakable. Joshua grabbed her hand. "We have to go." They left Marcus bleeding in the shack, his screams swallowed by fog and water. By the time dawn came, they were deep in the marsh, moving north with nothing but pain, resolve, and each other. Joshua nearly collapsed before noon. The wound was bad. Infection loomed like a second enemy. Victoria held him upright, half carrying him, whispering through tears, "Stay with me, please. I didn't come this far to lose you." Joshua forced his eyes open and met hers. "You didn't," he said. "You chose." And in that choice, made in blood, fear, and fire, their love ceased to be forbidden. It became survival. They reached safety the way most fugitives did in that decade, piecemeal, breath by breath, trusting strangers whose kindness carried risk. A fisherman ferried them across a narrow inlet without asking names. A woman in a weather-beaten house cleaned Joshua's wound with hands that shook but did not falter. A Quaker meeting house offered silence, then papers, then time. Each stop stitched their survival together. Joshua lived. The fever broke on the fourth night. Victoria sat beside him, counting his breaths, her own fear finally loosening its grip. When he woke, pale and exhausted, she laughed and cried at once, pressing her forehead to his. "You stayed," she said, voice breaking. "So did you," Joshua replied. Freedom came slowly, not as a trumpet call, but as ink drying on a page. Witnesses signed. Fees were paid. Names were written carefully, because names mattered now. When Joshua held the paper that declared him a free man, he did not smile. He closed his eyes and breathed, as if learning the shape of a new world inside his chest. They married in a small room with plain benches and clear windows. No rings, no spectacle, just vows spoken without fear. Victoria did not flinch when Joshua took her hands. Joshua did not hesitate when he said her name. They settled north of the city, where work was honest and suspicion was quieter. Victoria learned to sew and keep accounts without hiding. Joshua worked iron again, his strength tempered by patience. At night, they locked their door once and slept. Healing did not erase the past. It taught them how to carry it. Victoria still startled at sudden sounds, but now she reached for Joshua without shame. Joshua still woke from dreams of loss, but now Victoria's voice anchored him. They did not pretend love cured everything. They honored the work it required. Years later, when the nation finally named its wound and tore itself open to heal, they opened a small refuge, first a room, then a house, where women escaping violence could rest without explanation, and men long denied literacy could learn without fear. Victoria taught reading and arithmetic. Joshua taught metalwork and patience. They never returned to Thornhill. They did not need to. When Joshua died, old and free, Victoria held his hand and did not look away from the pain. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear decide your life. On their stone, she asked for words that told the truth. He protected her when fear ruled her days. She chose him when courage demanded everything. Together, they proved that love can be a shield and freedom a shared act. The fog still rolled in from the bay. Laws still failed people who needed them most. But somewhere beyond the reach of those old knights, 2 lives had bent history, just enough to make room for choice. The story is over, but the pain of that era still resonates. How are you feeling right now? Are you listening to this story alone or with someone? Share your feelings and where you are right now.